A very good morning to everyone present here with us today. My name is Arbaz Hashmi, and on behalf of Empower Financing, I welcome you all to our session on the new US visa process after COVID-19. US visa process has always been a mystery to everyone, and with these unprecedented times, it still remains one. Uh, Having insight into this entire scenario could certainly prove very beneficial for all the aspiring students who are joining us today. And who better than to give us that insight than someone who has been on the other side of this interaction, of this process? And for that very reason, we have with us joining Mandy Feuerbacher, who has been an ex-visa consular herself in China and Hong Kong. I wouldn't say much about her because I think she'd cover extensively about her enriching experiences. What I will talk about is how the day would go with us. We have about 60 minutes with us. The first half would be all about Mandy's experiences and her learnings, her any sort of comments or any sort of tips that she wants to talk about the new process, the new changes, anything at all. And the next half of the session would be all about your question and answers. So feel free to keep asking them as and when Mandy is speaking. I will be reaching out to you individually just to let you know that if Mandy would be covering a certain question in her presentation, or would we be addressing that question separately in the question and answers round, so that you are very well aware of when and how your question would be addressed. But enough about chit chat with me, and I will give the limelight to Mandy. Mandy, I'm making the presenter for the day, and with this, you'll be able to share your screen as well.
So, perfect. Thank you so much, Arbaz. Okay.
You're welcome.
Let me show my screen. Let me know if you can see it. Okay. So, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us as we talk about the student visa interview process. I know that this year has been a little bit messy. It's been crazy. Things have been changing very fast and all the time because of presidential proclamations, and you know, just the current climate has been very tough on international students and people interested in studying or immigrating to the United States. And I am sorry for that, but we do try to make things simpler for you guys, and I'm so happy to be talking to you. Okay, so if you've joined any of my webinars before with MPOWER, you know a little bit about my background. I am a former US diplomat and US consular officer in China, Mexico, and Hong Kong. I spent 7 years interviewing visa applicants. I've probably interviewed over 100,000 visa applicants, possibly even a little more than that. So I have seen every type of visa situation. I've seen, you know, great interviews. I've seen really terrible interviews that have impacted a person's chances to go to the United States. And I can't stress enough just how important this visa interview process is. Even though, you know, for many of you, it might only take a few minutes, but it's a very important few minutes to get right, because you can be in a lot of trouble if you don't handle your visa interview right. I'm also a licensed US immigration attorney. And so after I left government work at the end of 2018, I started practicing immigration law and really had a great connection with my clients, especially in terms of helping them prepare for their visa interview. And now I'm the executive vice president of Argo. I'm very passionate about the company. We're the first company in the world made up of former consular officers or visa officers with the US Department of State. We also have extensive connections with USCIS, the immigration agency domestically in the United States. So we do adjustment of status interviews as well to help you prepare for them. And to be honest with you, you know, Argo is, as most immigration attorneys in the US have said, it's a revelation. This information has never been available to visa applicants before, and we're here to provide you with one-on-one guidance to help you through the visa interview process, especially if, you know, you're nervous about the process, it's your first time applying. It's always helpful to talk to a former visa officer who has interviewed so many, hundreds of thousands of visa applicants to really help you get that interview right. And so I just wanted to share a couple of photos of my time from the State Department. This is actually where I began my visa officer journey and career at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, China. So this is me and my husband. We were both U.S. diplomats posted in Embassy, Beijing at that time. And it was a very fast-paced environment. I interviewed over 150 people a day. And so it was a very eye-opening experience for me to see that this is how immigration and visas are dealt with overseas by the US government. And so, of course, one of the great things about being a US diplomat is you always have the opportunity to meet really amazing people who come through the embassy. So this is then Vice President Joe Biden. Now he's running for president. And he's a very nice guy. He came into the embassy on a Saturday morning to speak to all the diplomats, and it was just a very cool experience to get to talk to him. And I think he's a great man. Okay, so back to the U.S. visa process. Why do people have problems with the U.S. visa interview? Let's just consider that for a second. And I think the first thing is that applicants generally tend to be very nervous and unprepared. And of course, that's totally understandable. It's going to be the first time that you talk to an American immigration official, government official. So of course, you're likely to be nervous. And also, I just have to say this, no one has expertise on the process. No one knows what actually happens. Each person who goes through this process may have their own experience because of their own personal situation, but nobody has seen every type of visa interview the way that we have. And so, and this is really where Argo comes in. One of the things that used to happen when I worked as a visa officer is we used to have to refuse so many people because this is our job. We're there to uphold the law. And us visa officers, we would look at each other and we would say, why don't we just start a visa consultation company where we would actually give people the real information they need to be successful? And of course, at the time we were joking because we really hated refusing visa applicants. But, after I left government service, I'm like, maybe that's not such a crazy idea, especially because overseas, there is so much bad information out there and people will trust that information because their cousin or their family member or a visa consultant told them, but nobody knows the information like we do. Number two, and this is still very hard for people to understand, is that you really can't rely on your documents. I can't tell you how many clients have come to me saying, you know what, I went up to the window, I took everything, I had so much information on why I was going to the US, and the officer didn't even look at anything, and I was giving a piece of paper that said 214B. So here's the secret. You really can't rely on your documents. And the reason for that is because as a visa officer, we know that documents can be faked. You can probably go on any street corner in Beijing, China, and buy all of the bank documents and the invitation letters that you need. And so officers know that the one thing that can't be faked is the visa interview and how the visa applicant responds to our questions. And so this is why you can't go into an interview thinking that, oh, your documents are going to save you. And I also highly recommend that you don't tell the consular officer, oh, here's all my paperwork and this will explain everything to you. Most of the time we will tell you, nope, we don't want to look at it. We want you to answer our questions. Next is the fact that visa officers are just overworked and we have very limited information. Like I mentioned, when I worked in Beijing, China, I interviewed over 150 people a day, and every day about 4,400 people would walk through the waiting room, and all of those people had to be interviewed. And so we're extremely overworked. There's not enough of us. We're working on limited information. We can see some information with our computer systems, but not everything. And visa officers, if you've been doing this job for enough time, you really develop a sixth sense for whether or not people are telling you the truth whether or not, you know, are they a little bit too nervous? Maybe a normal amount of nervousness is okay, but are they so nervous that clearly they have other intentions than what they're telling you? You know, it's very easy for us to look in your visa record and search, you know, this person said they were going for 2 weeks for vacation, you know, 5 years ago. Did they actually go for 2 weeks, or did they stay for 4 months and have a baby? You know, different weird things like that. It's very easy for us to find out. But because we're overworked and you have limited time with us, it's important that you present yourself the right way so that we're willing to listen to you, we're willing to pay attention to you and understand what you're saying. And that's really what Argo officers do. We understand the language of consular officers. We know what it takes for for an officer to change their mind about the last visa refusal and maybe give you a chance this time. And this is the information that we would share with you one-on-one during our consultations. And finally, there's language and cultural barriers because, you know, as a U.S. diplomat, one of the great perks about our job is we do get language training before we go overseas sometimes. So for example, I worked at the U.S. consulate in Mexico for 2 years. And before I went to Mexico, I studied the Spanish language in a very small class of 4 people every day for 6 months. And then I was sent to Mexico, and then all of a sudden I was on the visa line. So as you can imagine, even though we get language training, it's hard to, you know, it's not like after 6 months, I'm going to be like a native Spanish speaker. And so, and this is obviously more important in some countries than others. You know, in India, for example, most people do speak English, especially people who are looking to study in the United States. But in China and in Mexico, where there's other languages, you know, it's really important to know, you know, what you can say in a foreign language to the visa officer, because there are certain things that we understand and there's certain things that's just a little too complicated because we didn't get enough language training. So we're here to help you dispel with those language and cultural barriers. There's also cultural barriers for officers who are new to a country and immediately they're making decisions on somebody's visa application. Maybe they don't understand the culture yet. So you have to reach out and help understand our American culture and how American officers think. I'll just give you an example that I thought was so interesting when I worked in China. But I did a temporary assignment to the U.S. consulate in Chengdu, China, and there were a lot of brand new American officers who just started working as visa officers, and they reported something very weird. They said they were interviewing young couples who had just gotten married, they were newlyweds, but they were applying with their parents, and they were telling the American officer that they were going on a honeymoon, but they were taking their parents with them. This is completely unheard of in American culture. And so, of course, the first batch of applicants who would respond this way, they were getting refused because the American officer didn't understand the Chinese culture, that this was actually not all that strange. This is what we found out later, is that in central China, because going to the United States is such a big trip, you know, it's very far, it's very expensive. It's almost like a gift from young couples to their families because their parents who don't speak English would have a hard time navigating tourism in the US by themselves. So this was actually quite common. And of course, once American officers understood that, it was easier to believe the next person and approve their visas. So you should never underestimate the language and the cultural barriers facing the visa interview. And finally, the stakes are really, really high. Once you get refused a visa or once there's a problem, it becomes a really, really big problem. I can't tell you how many people used to come into the embassy in Beijing. You could tell these are very wealthy businessmen. They can pay for anything they wanted, but they had visa problems because one time they lied at their visa interview and this was figured out by the visa officer. So every single time they go in for their visa interview, their visa appointment, it becomes a very humiliating experience, and no amount of money at that point can help you out of that situation. So in terms of Argo, we do help people with problems with their visa interview, but you have to understand that after a certain point, it is much harder to walk that back. As a visa officer, we used to call, if somebody had been refused many times, 5, 6, 7 times, we would call it they were on the refusal train or the 214B train, and they couldn't get off the train. And this is what Argo is here to do. We're here to help you get off that refusal train. We're here to really help you before your first interview, because we really see Argo as an insurance policy. You want to make sure that you don't get this wrong, because the implications are for a long time and the stakes are very high. If you're someone who has high aspirations, you have ambitions, you want to create a life in the US, you want to study there, you want to get the best education you can, let's not let that US visa interview stand in your way. And so just a little bit more about Argo and exactly how we work. The company was started by a former consular officer who's also a licensed US immigration attorney. This has always been a dream of ours, to share accurate and correct information with visa applicants. And, why would you choose Argo? Let's just look at it for a second. First is, we want to tell you what we wish we could have told you as consular officers. When a consular officer refuses your visa under the section 214B, which I'm sure some of you have experienced, they actually don't have to give you a reason at all. And the reason is because if we tell you a reason for why we refused you, you're just going to try to argue with us. You're going to be like, no, you misunderstood. That's not what I meant. And we have a very short amount of time with each person, so we want to save time. Second is, as I mentioned, we'll help you prevent language and cultural miscommunication. We'll help you understand how an American officer thinks. We'll help you advocate for yourself and understand how to present your situation in the most effective way possible. And finally, we really want to help you succeed. It's much more fun for me and the other Argo officers to help clients through this process compared to our old jobs, which is have to judge you in about 2 minutes and not really know the situation, but have to take a wild guess. The State Department calls us human lie detectors, and that's what we're there to do. It's much more fun to work with people and help people. And so the Argo platform is really an online platform. It's available to people all over the world, and it connects visa applicants seeking US visas with former visa officers. And it's actually an incredibly smart platform. It's very intuitive, and it will always try to connect you with someone, with an officer who has worked in country where you will be applying, to give you the best experience. Although I do have to say, as former consular officers, we all speak the same language. We all understand the consular language and the visa language. And so if you do end up getting matched up with someone who hasn't worked in the country where you're applying, don't worry, we have all the information we need to help you. And for example, I've helped many students applying in India, even though I've never worked in India, and all of my clients have been incredibly satisfied with the results. So, but the platform does try to match you first with an officer who has worked in country. And so now I'm just going to share a couple things about the visa interview that you probably don't know. The first is that the consular officer has absolute discretion in deciding whether to approve or refuse your case. And what I mean by that is, if I'm an officer and I decide to refuse your visa, not even my supervisor or my boss can change the decision in the computer system. This is actually not permitted, and your boss can get into a lot of trouble for trying to change your decision, which means that consular officers, that officer that you're talking to, has a huge amount of power to decide your future in the United States. Second is that once you've been refused a visa, it is more difficult to have your visa approved the next time. And this is because visa officers, every single time they do an interview, they will take notes on the interview process and why they decided to refuse a person. So, an officer who is interviewing somebody who's been refused 5 times in a row will be able to look through all of those 5 officers' refusal notes to decide, oh, okay, so all of these colleagues of mine have decided that this person can't go to the United States. What am I going to decide? So it's always going to be your word against their friend and colleagues' decisions on your visa interview. Now, I have to say, though, that it is not impossible. We call them overturning a visa refusal when you take a refusal and you approve it the next time. I have approved so many visa applicants who have been refused many times before because I'm the first officer who decided to take a moment to really understand the applicant situation. So if you have been refused, times before, don't worry, we're here to help you. And finally, it's that your visa record is for life. From the first time that you've applied for a visa, maybe when you were 8 years old and you're going on vacation to Disney World with your parents, to the next time that you apply because you want to go study for high school or college in the United States, all of that record is continuous and we can see all of it. If your parents decide to immigrate to the US, they purchase an EB-5 investor-based visa, we can still see all of your non-immigrant visa, your temporary visa information. So this is why it's important to make sure that your visa record is pristine. You don't want any problems on there. You don't want anything that will cause a visa officer to make it more difficult for you in the next time you apply for an H-1B or an L-1 visa. And so I'm just going to run through really quickly the student visa processing, the COVID-19 impact. So as you know, it's been a crazy year. Nobody expected this pandemic to break out. When it happened in December of last year, I think people were really not conscious that it was going to take such a toll on everyone this year. And so on March 20th is when the State Department decided to stop all routine visa services to handle the pandemic. Then there was a ray of sunshine that broke through because in the middle of July, the State Department announced within a Twitter account that they were doing a phased resumption of routine visa services and that this was going to happen on a location by location basis. And finally, August 17th was when Mission India, which I understand a lot of people in the audience, you'll be applying in Mission India, started processing F1 and J1 visas. And so, of course, it's still on a limited basis. It's still really important to check your local embassy or consulate website to see, if they've started scheduling visa appointments. I get this question all the time, which is, when are embassies and consulates opening again? And so from these announcements, you can tell that the State Department definitely wants to start everything up again, but it's going to be on a country by country, city by city basis, because the State Department is evaluating, which countries are safe enough for U.S. diplomats to return to work. It's safe enough for visa applicants to stand in line next to each other in light of COVID, which is why they're trying to be so cautious. They're trying to keep everybody safe. So unfortunately, there is no way to really anticipate in advance when a location is going to be doing visa interviews. It's going to have to be up to you to check the website, keep your eyes and ears open. And I would say, the second that you can get a visa interview, go ahead and sign up for one, because even if they're not able to take you at the time that you want, maybe when you're applying right now, the visa interview, the first visa available is next year in January. I would sign up for that appointment because then you can apply for an emergency appointment if you can qualify. And then you can get in sooner than next January. So it's just really important to grab those when you can. Okay, next is your interview checklist. I like to always run through this really quickly so people have a good idea of what to bring. The first is you need to bring a passport with at least 6 months validity in it. Generally, the State Department cannot put a visa stamp in your passport if it's about to expire, so you'll want to check your passport. You'll also want to bring all of your old passports if you have any of other locations that you've traveled to. We usually like to see those. You'll want to bring your DS-160 confirmation page. That's the page with your photo and a barcode. You'll want to bring your I-20, which this year is, it's permitted to be electronic. In all of the other years, you've actually had to have the physical document. And finally, you'll want to bring a recent passport photo. And so this last requirement, it may depend on where you're applying. In certain locations, you might just get your photo taken at the time that you're taking your fingerprints or enrolling your biometrics. So it's important to follow the instructions for the location where you're applying. And finally, I leave this ... because there are other documents that you should probably bring with you, including a way to explain to the consular officer that you can pay for tuition in the United States, whether this is a loan letter or bank documents from your parents or your own bank account. I know I said before that documents are not that important, but on the flip side, it is best to bring everything that you have so that in case the officer asks to see it, you have it. Because if you don't have it and they really want to see it, then they're going to do something called 221G your case, which means that they're putting it in administrative or pending status. And then you have to go home, dig it up, and send it back into the embassy or consulate. And you really don't want to do that because then your case is sitting somewhere and it could get lost. And what we focus on at Argo is we just want to make the process as smooth and as quick for you as possible so that you will be a quick approval and not a quick refusal. Okay, so some of you tuning in might be in the US right now. Maybe you've already started studying in the US, maybe you've even started working on an employment-based visa, whether it's an L1 or an H1B. I think if you're in the US right now, because things are so crazy, I have a few suggestions for you. The first is to find a legal and legitimate reason to stay in the US. Because there's travel bans going on and the rules are constantly changing, if you're someone who has a long-term relationship with the United States, whether you're studying here for the next 4 years or you already have an internship or you have a job, I think at least from now until the middle of next year, it's probably best to stay in the US so you don't have any trouble getting back in. Unless you have a life or death situation, you have to leave, of course I understand that. But if you don't have to, it's a good idea to file what's called an I-539 form to change your status if the current status that you're operating on isn't going to hold you. For example, maybe you are on an F1 student visa, but your studies have just come to an end and you don't have a job yet, but you're hoping to find a job in the United States. Maybe it makes sense to file a change of status form in the meantime to switch to tourist status so that you have a little bit more time to, stay in the United States. So there's a lot of nuances with what works and what doesn't in this category. So if you're in the situation, I would highly recommend that you find a good immigration attorney that can explain all of the options to you. You may need a USCIS interview at a domestic field office if you do change status. So depending into what category of visa you're switching into, USCIS may notify you that they need to interview you. And USCIS interviews are not all that different from consular interviews. USCIS largely has the same goals and mission as the Department of State, and we actually speak frequently to our USCIS colleagues on the government side. So we have a very good idea of what they expect at this interview. So if you're in this situation, feel free to sign up for an Argo consultation. We're happy to help you with your adjustment of status interview. And so, again, if you're in the US, try not to leave as long as you have a legal and legitimate reason to stay. If you don't, of course, you have to timely leave so that you don't overstay your status, and that could trigger a lot of problems in the future if you decide to come back. But I know it's a tough time right now for everyone, so I just urge you to hang in there. So a few tips for your visa interview. Work with your school to understand all of the rules because things are changing a lot right now, whether schools are operating on a completely online model or a hybrid model, they will have the latest information with their government liaison to know what's allowed and not allowed. So you understand, whether you're going to be here or studying in your home country, but online, just work with your school. Visa appointments are open around the world. Check your embassy or consulate website, and keep your ears open. Maybe a friend or colleague will tell you, hey, I was able to get a visa appointment. And then that's how you find out. And then you'll want to sign up for the next one that's available because they're really in high demand right now. Finally, that the visa interview is really important. It's important that you prepare with experts who really understand the process, like our ARGO officers. And finally, you'll want to be confident during your visa interview. And so I think even for people who are not too worried about their visa interview, they're maybe just a little bit nervous, what you can get from an ARGO consultation is that it lets you be confident during your interview, because I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with that have been like, wow, okay, I had no idea that the interview was going to be that fast, because I usually say, okay, let's do a mock interview, and don't be weirded out if it's just a couple minutes, because this is what I tell them. Consular officers are always looking for that quick approval or that quick refusal. And so you want to be the quick approval. If you get to your visa interview, they don't even look at you, you're doing everything you're supposed to after your ARGO consultation, they just approve you. That's because you handled it right. Because as visa officers, we have a sixth sense. We're observing you as you stand in line. We're looking at what you're wearing. We're trying to figure out okay, does this person seem like they memorized some lines just to tell me, or are they actually listening to my questions? So once you have our insider's perspective, it's much more easy to be confident during your visa interview. Okay, so visa revocations. This is a tough topic. I put this slide up because I understand that earlier this year, there are about 4,000 to 5,000 Indian nationals who had their visas revoked by the State Department or CBP. And a visa revocation is a serious issue. I have done a lot of visa revocations in my time. I've seen, situations where the revocation was reversed. It's hard to get done, but again, it could happen if you handle your interview the right way. And so these visa revocations happened because there were a few companies in the US that were charging students for OPT training or pre-employment training, in exchange providing them an employment letter and an EAD card, employment authorization document. So this is actually not allowed based on our rules. But some students didn't realize, maybe they were swindled into it, maybe they just fell into the trap. And so the State Department doesn't care. They just blanket revoked 4,000 to 5,000 visas, regardless of what the actual situation is. So this is something that we can help. We can help you understand your situation from the perspective of a visa officer, what you're really up against. We can help you best present your case to the visa officer at your next interview, even if they have to do administrative processing, look deeper into your case, because whatever happens, if you want to come back to the United States, that problem is going to stay at the window and be there until you address it. And finally, we can help you, have your best chance for success at your next interview. And we know how to talk to consular officers. We know ourselves very well and what would change our mind. So, if you or someone had a visa revocation, definitely, take them to ARGO, let them know that we can help them. Okay, so I love this quote, and I just wanted to share it with you guys. So this is an ARGO officer who's a former U.S. Visa officer who worked at the U.S. consulate in Mumbai. And she said to me, I adjudicated over 20,000 visas in India and often saw applicants who were ill-prepared or had received misinformation about the visa process from family, friends, or the internet. This sometimes led to their visas being denied because they aren't able to articulate their qualifications for a visa. Preparing for your visa interview with Argo will allow you to understand the mindset of a consular officer, the visa decisions going on behind the window, and give you the best possible chance of succeeding with your visa application. And I think that's just so well said and so true, because you want that success at the visa window to be something that you prepared for, and not because it was an accident. Because if it's an accident, you know, it's very possible that it could go the other way. Who knows? And this chart, I actually got the data straight from the State Department website. So U.S. student visa issuances have actually been dropping over the last 5 years, even before the current administration, which means that it's even more important that you are prepared, you don't take chances if having a life or career in the United States or an education in the United States is something that's very important to you. And now I'm going to just turn it over for any questions that you have. You'll notice that there is a QR code on the screen. MPOWER clients and webinar viewers do get a significant discount on an Argo consultation, but you have to use this link because this is the way to get the discount. If you were to visit us at argovisa.com, you'll notice that the price is actually quite high for a consultation with a former officer. It's $575 for a 30-minute session, but with this special Argo rate, you can get it for $350. So take a picture, send it to friends, feel free to share this, and we really hope to help you.
Thank you so much, Mandy, for that awesome presentation. Let's go to some questions and see what our students have in mind. There is a question that we see here. It's said that there's a quota for specific countries. Is it true?
So I think it depends on if you're talking about non-immigrant visas, which are temporary visas, or immigrant visas. If you're trying to get an immigrant visa to go to the United States, which means that you're permanently looking to move and relocate to the United States, there are quotas for every country. If you are, you know, just applying for an employment-based visa or a student visa, there is no quota. There is nobody to tell a consular officer, hey, you have to refuse this many cases a day. We don't do that.
Understood. And another question says, do the students get any priority if the university start date is approaching fast, now that the process has just begun?
So the way I understand it is they do prioritize student visas. So if you sign up for an appointment and, you know, it's much later than you anticipated, it's not until, you know, November or December or January. Once you get that visa appointment, then you can apply for an emergency appointment and hope that they'll take you. And you can explain to them that, you know, your start date is coming up. But the problem is you can't actually apply for an emergency appointment until you have your student visa appointment. So that's why I always tell people, just sign up for an appointment. Don't worry about the time, because once you get that appointment, you can apply for an emergency appointment.
Got it. And do they have to submit or upload any specific documents to show that there is an urgency or an emergency for their appointment?
You probably do. And what I would do is make sure that you visit the embassy or consulate website, follow the instructions for the emergency appointments. They will usually ask you to submit something that will show that you have good reason for the emergency appointment.
Got it. Abhijit, I hope that answered your question. I think we have another one from Philippe. She says that, does it matter how long have two people been married when they want to apply for maybe a US visa? She says that she wants to marry just before getting admitted to grad school. Will that affect her chances in any way?
It can, but it's really hard to know without knowing, you know, more about the situation. So I would say marriage in general, of course, we always look at a case, you know, like an overview of the case. And if the marriage has any reason with somebody going to the United States, then it could affect it. If it doesn't really have anything to do with why you're in the United States, then you're probably fine.
Okay. We have another one from Haripriya. What is the appropriate, or rather, what would be the appropriate time for students admitted for Spring 21 to apply for the visa interviews?
I would say that you want to apply as soon as possible, but keep in mind that there are a few restrictions. Once you get your student visa, you actually can't enter the US until 30 days before your start date. So keep that in mind. But I think once you know for sure that you want to come over here for spring, just get the earliest appointment possible, because it's hard to get appointments right now. So I wouldn't wait just because you think you might not need the visa right away.
Okay. So Felipe, I think, posted some more information about the situation from the earlier question, that she said that she needed to get married for her to get the partner's visa. Would that sound suspicious, because they had just gotten married before their interviews for the spouse to get a partner's visa?
Oh, I see what you mean, because he's following as a dependent visa.
Exactly.
Yes, I think it could. But again, it depends on how you handle the interview. I imagine that the interview will go a little bit into, your relationship and how you know each other and how long you've known each other. So, if the situation is, oh yeah, I met him like a month ago and we decided to get married yesterday, that might seem suspicious. So without really knowing the situation, it's hard to say, but I would just say that make sure that you're prepared for the interview on the extent of your relationship.
Got it. And should they take interviews separately or together?
If I were you, I would just interview together.
Understood. There have been instances where students have been rejected for certain reasons, and I think one of them, Bhivan, actually puts up a situation where he was rejected for the rejection slip said that he does not have proof for enough family ties in his home country, and he mentions that he was not even asked a question related to his family. Was there something else that could have gone wrong?
Yeah, so I think what people have to understand about that type of refusal, it's called a 214D refusal, is that it's really a catch-all. So it may not have anything to do with your family. It may not have anything to do with, even possibly the questions that you think they were asking you. But if the consular officer doesn't like your response in any way, or they think that maybe you have different intentions, or maybe they are just worried that once you go to the US, you're never going to come back, or they think you're going to be an illegal overstay, then they just say, okay, this is the 214D refusal. It doesn't have anything to do with family ties. We just use that as sort of an excuse for any sort of refusal that we don't, when we don't feel right about a case.
Okay, understood. So for students who are, let's say, on a fully funded scholarship, or maybe have graduate assistantship as well, how likely are their chances to get rejected? Or, or do finances play a very huge role in any of an approval rate?
Finances do play a large role, because consular officers always want to make sure that visa applicants can afford to pay tuition, and tuition can be very expensive in the United States. But I have to say, it's really hard to say what are the chances, because it's really all about that visa interview and, how to advocate for yourself without being pushy. You can't, sometimes I get clients who are so enthusiastic. They're like, look, I got a scholarship. I got this, I got that, I'm ready to go. But maybe that over enthusiasm could play against them at the visa interview as well. So it's really kind of a fine line. You want to make sure that the officer understands, obviously, that you're getting a scholarship, but they might also have questions then about, okay, maybe you have your tuition paid for, but how are you going to pay for life expenses? What do your parents do? Let's talk about, your personal life. Tell me about your parents' jobs. Just certain questions that they might ask. And it's really all about how you handle that interview.
Understood. And I think a very common question for a lot of students that they've been asked is that if they have any relatives staying in the United States, maybe, right?
Yeah.
How do they, I mean, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? There's always been very ambiguity around that.
Yeah. So I think it just depends. I'm so sorry to give vague answers, because I hate it when my answers are taken out of context and applied to everything, because everybody's situation is so different.
Understood.
But you do always have to declare when you have family in the United States. It's one of the questions on your DS-160 form. And I would say it's one factor that the officer looks at when evaluating your situation. And it depends on how close you are to that family. Maybe it's just a cousin that you haven't talked to in 10 years, and now you're going to go study at Harvard. Maybe that has nothing to do with your case. But, if it's, you have both of your parents and your grandparents living in the US, and they just moved there last year, and now all of a sudden, you've already graduated college 4 years ago, and now suddenly you want to go for a second degree, that might raise some red flags in the officer's mind. So it depends, but it is definitely one factor that we look at, and it's not something that you should hide from the officer, because it's always a bigger deal if the officer realizes that you haven't been truthful with them, because then they're likely to disregard all of your other responses because they think that you can't be trusted.
Yeah, okay. And that would be like a permanent mark on the profile as well for any future attempts.
Yeah, absolutely. So, depending on how big of a lie that you're telling, you could get a permanent bar or permanent ineligibility to the United States.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. That's pretty serious, and it's really scary. It's called a 61, and it's called fraud or misrepresentation. And I mean, I'm sure you guys are a great bunch. Like, you wouldn't want to be caught up in that, because it makes it very difficult to overcome that type of situation. You can still try, but it's hard.
Is it advisable for a student who has a B1, B2 visa already to go to the United States and then get their student visa processed in any chance? Or is that possible?
I'm going to have to review the rules, but I don't think that you can adjust status from a tourist visa to a student visa. And even if you're technically permitted to do it through USCIS, it's generally not looked upon very favorably, because clearly you were originally going to the US either for tourism or for short business meetings. And it's a big life change to all of a sudden decide that you want to stay in the US and become a student. And so you would have to explain yourself very well at the USCIS interview. But I think in the back of my head, I remember there being a rule that you're not allowed to do that, but just be very careful about that situation.
Got it. So we got a lot of questions that were about students getting rejected in their previous attempts. Just wanted to put up a blanket answer for all of them, or if it's not, maybe should they be a little hopeful about their chances, and can they reapply rather for their visa interviews?
Yes, they should reapply.
Got
it. But again, it depends on the reason why you were refused. And the funny thing is, for so many of our Argo clients, they're so confused as to why they were refused. They're like, I don't know what happened. It was like a 30-second interview. They didn't even ask any questions. They didn't look at anything. But when they describe their situation to a former consular officer like myself, I'm like, I know exactly what happened, and I know exactly why you're refused, because we made so many of these decisions, So it's important to understand from an officer's perspective why you were refused, and then try to address those concerns before your next interview. And I would say that it's even more important that you do an Argo consultation if you've been refused before, because every single time you get refused, it's on your record. And so you don't want to go in again blindly, not knowing why you were refused. You want to go in prepared so that you can hopefully turn that situation around.
Got it. Understood. Sometimes these officers actually ask about the recent travel history for a candidate. How
Yeah.
does that affect the decision?
I think it's because when somebody has a lot of travel that can be seen from their passport, it's because we understand that they have the resources and the means to travel. So if you're someone who claims that you want to go to the United States on vacation, and we see that your passport is completely blank, it's a brand new passport, you just applied for it a few months ago, then we're like, why would you want to go for tourism all of a sudden to the United States? That doesn't make sense. You know, if you're from India, for example, where are some countries that Indians like to, first go on vacation? So we'll notice the cultural patterns with that, and it makes us feel more comfortable when we see that, somebody has traveled a lot before they try to go to the US.
Okay, that's fair point. And does unemployment gap plays a role in assessing someone's profile, or visa officers are not at all concerned about it?
We do look at it. So if there is a big gap, we might ask you about it. Like, oh, it looks like, there was a time you didn't work. So hopefully you have you're prepared to answer that question.
Okay. Would you maybe list, or would you be able to list, let's say, about 3-4 things that people should definitely remember or need to be careful about when they approach visa interview? Maybe, I don't know, just not something in detail, but maybe 4 things that really affect their decision outcome.
Yeah, I would say one thing to remember is never shove all of your documents through the window. We really hate that, especially if you bring a lot of documents. A lot of times, we don't even like to look at anything. So if you did bring a lot of things, just hang on to them until we ask you for them. We might say, hey, do you have your parents' bank information, or do you have this, or do you have that? And then at that time, you can, rifle through and pick out what we need to see individually. Also, sometimes if you speak too close to the microphone, it causes an echo on the other side, and it's very painful for us. So try not to get too close and talk too closely to the microphone. Let me try to think if there's anything else. Again, make sure that you have all of your documentation. If you're someone who gets checked, you'll want to make sure that you have all of your paperwork for that, that your CV is updated and detailed. We hate having to send people home for new documents, that we want to look at because they're not prepared. And just to tell you one quick story, there was a case that we found on an officer's desk that had been interviewed months before, and the officer had asked for this document. The applicant had gone home, gotten it, sent it back in, and it was put in the folder, but somehow the folder got misplaced and nobody could find it. And it was in the desk of this officer, and the officer had already left the country. He moved on to Estonia, where he was going to be working in his next assignment. And so this is why it's important to be prepared, so that a decision can be made on your case without waiting for more things from you because you're unprepared or whatever, because then it gives the case more of a chance to be lost and pass through many hands, and you don't want that.
Oh, okay. That's that's really new information. Didn't really know that that's also possible.
Yes, very possible, because especially at a busy mission like India, there's so many people who go in for applications, so many pieces of paper go across your desk. You want to make it as easy as possible for your case to get approved and not have any problems.
So since the process let's talk a little bit about maybe the India process. One question on that.
Yeah.
Since the visa embassies have begun to reopen and started the application scenarios as well, has the the normal process or have things changed in any way from the normal, or have they been working just pretty much the same way?
So what I would say is that I think in this climate, because the administration has been so tough on immigrants and international students and people wanting to come to the United States, I think that visa interviews, just even in the past year, just based on conversations with my colleagues that still work for the State Department, it has been tougher. So you want to be prepared in the sense that maybe if you're applying 5 years ago, you would have easily been granted a visa, but now because, we take our direction from the top and everybody is being very tough right now, just expect that the interviews will be a little bit tougher. And so actually in our Argo consultation, we try to do a good job really grilling the client because, in my experience, I was a very tough vice consul when I was on the line. And so I tell my clients, if you can pass an interview with me, then you can probably pass your interview, no problem. You want to prepare for the worst case scenario.
Prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So how exactly can Argo help anybody who is, let's say, in the US, Mandy? What kind of services can you help out? Maybe is it something that you can help them out with an OPT consultation or an H-1B consultation? How does Argo help with those two?
Yeah. So how Argo can help with students who are in the US is we help you prepare for your USCIS adjustment of status interviews. So unfortunately, Argo, we're not a law firm. We're not an immigration law firm. So if you need somebody to prepare your I-539 for you, if you're changing status, if you, are already in the US and you're looking for someone to file your L1 or H-1B petition, we don't do those things. But we just handle the interview preparation process, which I honestly think is the most important part, because your paperwork can be amazing, but if you don't present well, and we'll tell you if you have problems or there are things you need to focus on or work on, that's a really, really big hurdle. But I think in this climate, if you're not a green card holder, you're not an American citizen, it's always a good idea to have a good immigration lawyer that that you can maybe go to either for advice or a consultation or a petition or work that you need to do with USCIS.
Okay. And for people who are taking their interviews together, could be a couple, could be a family, does the decision of the visa officer applies to all the people who in that group, or it could be individually taken for every profile?
It could be individually taken, even if you're interviewed together. So I have interviewed families in groups, and there's even been times where I didn't do this all the time, but I knew that some of my fellow visa officers would. They would say, okay, the three of you have passed your interview, but I don't think you have enough ties, or you have this problem or whatever. They might not tell you the problem, but they might choose one person to refuse. And I don't know. I don't really agree with that approach, but I know that there are certain officers that took that approach.
Okay. Got it. So, okay, anybody who's going, I think we do have a question about someone who's willing to apply for a visa interview with their wife. And so if the wife has a weak profile, then there are chances that can affect the decision on her interview. So you need to keep that in mind as well. And for spring 21, I think that's the next intake, what we have right now. And I think a lot of students would be from the fall 20 intake, actually, who would have deferred their admits to the next one. Any special advice or opinion that you might have for them before we wrap up?
I would say just make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row, like have everything lined up, have all of the paperwork that you need to show the officer, even, obviously in case they ask for it. But because the rules are very complicated in terms of, who's allowed to go over there right now, the hybrid model versus people fully studying online, just make sure that you know the rules, because keep in mind that visa officers are getting these rules at around the same time as you. And so they're reviewing them and they're figuring it out. But if you're somebody who can, very easily present the process in a clear and confident manner, it makes it easier for the consular officer to do the job.
Okay, understood. And before we wrap up, any final notes that you might want to share with people?
No, not really. We're here to help. We know it's a tough process. I still think very highly of an education in the U.S. I think we have the best education in the world. I know I'm an immigrant myself. I was actually born in China, and so just even to see how my own life has changed by studying in the U.S. and being an American citizen, it's been amazing to me. So don't give up. If your situation is tough, we understand. We're here to help. And we wish everybody the best of luck. And also, please stay safe during COVID. It's a tough time, 2020.
Cool. Thank you so much for those words, Mandy. For everybody
Yeah.
who joined us today, I hope it was really enriching for you guys and it was really something that you could benefit from. If you want to reach out to Argo, you already have the link here. You would also get an email from us, which would have a sign up link, which you can use to book a consultation with Argo and Mandy and a team. Really wish you guys all the best for your journeys ahead and hope to see you all of you at least making that interview and living the life that you want to. So thank you so much, guys. Ciao for now.
And thanks for having me, Arbaz. Thank
It's
you. Bye bye.
it's a pleasure, Mandy. It's really a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.